Okay, fellow Druids, welcome to an episode of Full Circle. As always, your host, Chad, Cheddar Caveman, on lots and lots of things. So a lot of discussion has continued to crop up about models and units. So today, excuse me, my soda. Today, I want to discuss the Tharn Wolf Riders. I have discussed them before back in my old format where I did, a longer episode with many parts. And I didn't go back and re-listen to my video to see exactly like what advice I did or didn't give there. I also didn't go to see how far back that was. So I'm not sure. I may have reviewed them even before I really started to play them a lot. And so we're gonna go over them again. I'm gonna barrel through the card first, and then I'm gonna talk about what I see with them. Apologies. I know a lot of people. There's sort of a contentious topic to a degree. Sort of, I guess. That may not be. And then I lost my card here. That may not be exactly the right term, I guess, but regardless, we are. I'm going to discuss them. So, real quick, their stats. They're Tharn Wolf Riders. So they're Speed 9. They are Strength 6, Mat 6, Rat 6, Defense 14, Armor 14, Command 9, with Assault, Cavalry, Pathfinder, and of course they're on large bases as cavalry models. You get 5 models. You get 3 models for 11 points, 5 models for 18 points. They have 5 wounds each. Their field allowance 2, like I think the majority of cavalry are. For their attacks, they have a thrown javelin, which is range 7, POW 9 weapon master. In melee, they have a 1-inch range POW 9 weapon master attack, and then the mount is also half-inch range POW 12. If we flip the card over, just a couple rules back there. The unit has Annoyance, which is living enemy models within 1 inch of a model, of this model, suffer -1 to attack rolls. They have Reposition 5. And the Thrown Javelins, as you may expect, have the rule Thrown, which just says any modifiers to strength apply to the power of the weapon. So it's positive or negative. Okay. So that's the nuts and bolts of Wolf Riders. Move a little bit of that glare. Where do Wolf Riders live, and what are their strengths? And we'll talk a little bit about what their weaknesses are as well. So, as far as strengths, let me back up. Where do they live? The place that they live, realistically speaking, is in the Devourer's Host theme. Obviously, there's always the possibility to play on without a theme today. In my opinion, generally, you're going to not want to. You're going to need more reasons to do it than not to do it, if that makes sense. So, look for them in the Devourer's Host theme. Second, what is it that they do? So they are one of the fastest units in the game, Speed 9. Other Speed 9 cavalry are the Flamebringers, which are actually very similar in their output to these guys, or these ladies. The Flamebringers, the Blazers, the Tempest Blazers and Signar, the Grey Lord Outriders, I think, are Speed 9. If not, they're Speed 8 with sprays. I'm not recalling. I think they're Speed 9. And Soul Hunters and Raptors in Legion. I believe those are the current Speed 9 units. All cavalry. There's some other things that can get... there are things that can buff to get to Speed 9, but naturally just being Speed 9 is important. And then Reposition 5, which I think all of the units I just said, I think they all share that reposition stat. It's sort of how they define light cavalry. And so that's the first thing. They're extremely fast. The next thing is they are very flexible. So At POW 9, they have a ranged attack and they have a melee attack. They're pretty accurate in melee. They're average at range. So that's sort of another piece of their puzzle. To me, what you're really looking for when you're playing Wolf Riders is you need a damage buff. Obviously, some accuracy buffs are great. The way you buff damage can vary. But in my opinion, if you're going to play Wolf Riders, you are going to need... Well, you don't need to, but you should probably bring some kind of buff to their damage. Mostly because the thing that they do... So first let's talk about this. In some games, what you're going to be able to do with them is just do some hit and run tactics, right? So they're speed 9, which means just walking and throwing javelins, they threaten 16 inches. So that puts them... I realize that puts them roughly in the category of like a speed 6 infantry with a rage 10 gun, which is not by itself super fantastic, right? But the difference, the important differences of that is at the end of that attack with your reposition 5, you're as far away as something with a 12-inch gun, potentially, or you're back in their backfield. So that's the first thing to make sure that you're identifying is what the correct mode of what they should be doing is. I would say, in my experience with the way how I've played them, that I've found them occupying that role the least, but they still do it. I would say, you know, it's like a third to 40% of the time, somewhere 30-40% of the time they may do that, and it depends on the matchup a ton, of course. So that's the first thing to recognize. Is that the correct move? The next thing to recognize is it worth assaulting to, even though I might put one of these models in danger, to get the maximum range? So the maximum range for them is 19, which puts them an inch beyond pretty much any ranged list out there, or any ranged unit out there, right? Because they, usually it's like speed 6, shoot 12 is sort of the cap there. So you're 1 inch past that, which is potentially very valuable to you. And that's going to be rare. I would say I very rarely do that, or like it'll be like one, if I think it's worth it to throw one into a bad position, or by doing so I'm not actually putting it in a bad position, I'll do that. If there's something you think you can kill with a single javelin, like it could be worth it, right? Like if they let's say if they left like their Journeyman Warcaster exposed with no focus for some reason, and you can get a Wolf Rider throw on it, it's dice off, even without a buff. If you think you can reasonably hit, you are dice off 5, which means on a 10 you'll kill the Journeyman Warcaster. So things like that. So like if you can get that, do it. Just as a let's not do that. Just as a point. So that's one piece. But the final thing is they threaten 12.5, 13 inches in melee, and I say that because you often are going to want to ensure that you get the impact attack off, and that's valuable. And this is really where they start getting into the value range. So at 12.5 inches, you need to be... It's like 12 actually to get the impact off, because you do actually have to base something, and I can't really, like, once we start talking game state, like without me displaying a game state to you, it sort of gets hard to do. So regardless, your best bet is trying to get those impact attacks off. And the reason for that is when you're like, well, they only have this POW 9 charge attack, even with Weapon Master, you're like, so what? And they have a POW 9 assault throw, and again, you're like, well, it's Weapon Master, but so what? And then they have a POW 12 mount attack, which doesn't get an additional die, and you're like, so what? However, add a damage buff to that, and now you just put another 6 damage on the table because you made 3 attacks instead of, you know, +2 or something like that. Most buffs math out to being about +2. The one exception, and that's my most the one I like the most with them, actually, at least as of right now. So the next place that we go is the math on stuff like that means you would be actually pretty surprised at what they're able to kill if you have a damage buff with them. I've mathed it out. You do have to use, I think, the full unit, but they will take out a Khador Heavy. And I know some of you are probably like, well, at 18 points, shouldn't they? And my answer is sort of, right? Like, yes, I'm using a damage buff, and yes, I'm using a whole unit, which is usually 18 points, which rarely is a Khador Heavy going to cost that many points. You're, even after their CID changes that are coming, they're going to cost, they're likely going to cost more like 11 to 13, 14, something like that. So, yes, your unit is going to cost more. However, you have reposition, which means you might be able to be safe. You also can... you don't necessarily have to kill it all in one shot because you can cripple some systems just by going in with, say, 3 of them and keeping 2 back. Your unit's also more flexible than some of those Khador Heavies are going to be, right? They're speed 9 and have a ranged attack. So, yes, I may do another video about talking about the value of models, which I think might be particularly important as we have a CID approaching soon, and just for anybody who's been looking at CID, I may have a discussion on that in the future. But however, Wolf Riders with a buff will kill most heavies that are in the game, whether they skew defensively or offensively. And there's exceptions to that, of course, right? Because if they have something like dodge or things like that, you know, there's no perfect unit. But my Wolf Riders have taken out a Carnivian with Spiny Growth. They've taken out Khador Heavies. They've taken out Signar Heavies. They've taken out Circle Heavies, Legion Heavies. They will kill stuff. And the nice thing about them, or the particularly good thing about them, is in Steamroller 17, the circle zones tend to be on the outsides. There's two where they're in the middle, 2 are there on the outsides, and with the speed that they have, you can start with them basically at the back of your zone, possibly not even in the zone, and they are threatening the entire zone. And you can even start, I'm going to use my hands to illustrate this, you can even start kind of fanning outward with them, and they're going to continue to threaten those zones. It's true for the rectangles as well. They don't, they threaten the whole zone. They are not... they're not as critical there because they're not scoring that zone, but the fact that they can potentially bully some stuff out of that zone can be really key. So this is kind of high level still. So why do I find Wolf Riders to be good? Again, the reposition. Again, having more bodies. So a lot of our lists, and I think a lot of once the Bones buffs went in and the Call of the Wild theme force dropped, I think everybody sort of just reverted to this idea that Circle is meant to be a Warbeast faction, and we are very good at being a Warbeast faction. I don't want to dismay anybody on that, but what I think has been forgotten is in Steamroller that unless you're playing a lot of lights, which is a valid approach, you might start having an issue with things trying to get into zones, especially as control areas get smaller, right? We have several Fury 6 casters, and they're not generally able to cover the entire width of the board because their control area is the size that it is, and you can't really afford to have your Warbeasts go outside of that. Sorry, I'm forgetting my words today. So that's when I started really looking at Wolf Riders, because one of the things they do is basically they can flank. They don't have to, but they can flank pretty much the hardest that we have. We have some ambush from the Wolves of Ouroboros in that theme, and we have a few other things. But the Wolf Riders really like to flank. They really can threaten that outside. They really will force your opponent to spread out, and then when they do, they're going to hit hard. I generally, the way I've been, so I just want to talk about how I'm playing them so that we're all on the same page. So I've been playing them with Una 2. I have a battle group with like 6 Griffins. I have 2 Wolf Riders, 2 units of Wolf Riders. And they take Hand of Fate and Mirage extremely well. Those are fantastic buffs for that unit. Hand of Fate buffs literally everything they do. They are making, as I said, if you can set it up against hard targets, they can make 3 attacks each across 5 of them, which is 15 attacks that you're applying Hand of Fate both to hit and to damage on. And Weapon Master attacks that you have the potential to spike higher with Hand of Fate are even taking more advantage of that spell. So they are fantastic in that role. Mirage on them takes them from being the fastest unit to being, oh my god, the fastest unit. And it can be a very critical spell in that matchup. So they are so good with her, in my opinion. I know a lot of people don't like playing them. So to talk about some drawbacks of them real quick, 1414 is not going to save you from boosted guns. It's just not. With Una, you can put them in when you actually can get the whole unit basically in wind wall. There'll be 2 that won't in the back if you triangle it correctly, but you won't be able to draw a line of sight to them. So you can get them all into a wind wall. I rarely do that because I want to spread them out. I don't really want them central, but if there's enough shooting, I might do that. Anyway, so you can rarely will you do that, but being able to make them threaten farther, threaten to hit harder, I'm frequently rotating Hand of Fate and Mirage between them, just because a lot of times I don't recast Mirage because I kind of just need it early, but being able to rotate those buffs means that one unit hits really hard, activate Una, get it over to the other unit, they're able to hit really hard, clear out stuff, and then I've still got my battle group, which I have access to Primal and Flank and whatnot for, so that's the deal with that list. But you can take that same idea, you can play it with any of our other damage buff casters, in my opinion. Baldur 1, which can give them blast immunity, cover on his feet. It's a little tougher to get them in the feet because, again, it's a bit smaller. But just something to consider. Mosar has Curse of Shadows, Wormwood has Curse of Shadows, and both have some defensive measures. Wormwood much more so. I tried them a little bit with Tanith with Scything Touch. I may go back and try that some more at some point. It didn't play the way I wanted it to that game, but I may have just had it may have just been a bad game. I tend to like them in duplicate. I know a lot of people aren't super fond necessarily of playing 2 units of stuff, or they don't want to buy 2 units of it, they don't want to paint 2 units of Cav. Totally get it. In my opinion, a lot of what I've been finding with Tharn in any variety, be it the, well, not in any variety, but be it the Ravagers or the Wolf Riders, what I've started to find is that having sort of a hitting a certain threshold of the amount of them that's out there really actually amplifies what they do, right? So 1 unit of Cav might be something that they can dedicate like a really potent ranged unit to dealing with, and then you're going to get no work out of your cavalry. But if you have 2 units of cavalry and they have to decide, well, how do I handle these Cav models? You can, by having 2, you can kind of overcome that. Also with Una, since that's where I've been playing them, with Una, I can, if I do the spread out thing that I was describing, and I start losing a flank, Una's battle group can shift to that flank, especially if the other unit is really holding strong on their side, which provides me with a lot of different options. Also, like I said, they can go in the middle and try to be safe in wind wall. They can do a lot of things. One technique I haven't tried yet that I want to is putting both units on the same side and sort of having them flank even harder on that side. I don't know if that'll work yet. I've talked about it a bunch, and I've not actually just tried it. Kind of just have defaulted into what I do with her. So that's how I've been playing Wolf Riders, and that's why I have success with them. I know a lot of people are like, well, for their points, they just don't hit hard enough, or for their points, they don't survive long enough. They do jam in pretty well. You can sometimes jam up entire units with just 2 of them. Annoyance, making them defense 15 against usually a lot of the things you would jam into. It's pretty good. Large bases means they can't be trampled. A few things like that. Obviously, being able to give them something like stealth would be great. I think our only options for that are Grail's Feet and Kai 1. You could try them with Kruger 1 to give a lot of the things that give us defensive measures for them don't really bring offensive output for them. You could play them without bringing any additional offensive output, but I think that you're going to feel that they don't... you're not going to have as flexible of a list, basically. I think if you're going with 2 units of them, you're wanting them to be able to be threatening in a lot of different vectors. That's my take on it. You could play 1 unit. I have not had the experience with doing that. So it might be that I'm having success with playing 2 units where other people are not having success because they're only playing with 1. Or maybe it is still successful, with just different. So just keep that in mind from my perspective is by that. Just real quick, since I play them max units because of Hand of Fate. If you're going to do something like play them without... what do I want to say? If you want to play them like without a buff like that, if it's more of a debuff situation, or you have a specific role, a min unit is still a fantastic option. At 11 and 18 points, it's essentially it's a tiny fraction off, but they're basically the same cost either way. So don't get too hung up on that. And one of the things I haven't talked about yet is let me talk real quick about list building concerns with them. So 2 units of them in Devourer's Host is going to leave you exactly 4 points short of 40 points. I've usually filled that gap with a Night Witch. Obviously, if you're putting more units in the list, that gap will easily fill itself. But the negatives to how it plays in Devourer's Host are what you really, really want to be able to do is bring the Tharn Wolf Rider champion with them, because she's fantastic. Well, she would be really good support. Veteran Leader making you Mat and Rat 7 is quite good, and obviously being able to use her to maybe unjam you or to get into an interesting position and so forth. I see a lot of potential in that. However, that model is 8 points and is not allowed for free in that theme, at least as of the recording of this video. I would love to see both of those things change, because I think when I'm building a list where I want to bring Wolf Riders, like the natural thing you want to do is bring the things that synergize with it. And at this point, like that model, I have done a video about that model as well. I'm not going to go fully into it here, but at 8 points, I think it's probably too expensive. I have not been able to justify finding 8 points in my list, as that is while it is a Tharn and it would add to would add to my Tharn count in the list for the other benefits. It's just been a really hard sell for me to really like make that fit the way I want it to. I would really love to. If I could take that model for free, I would. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, of course you take an 8-point model. Go back to my video where I talked about how the points don't really matter. When you're talking about that, it's a free card. She could cost 10,000 points. If I could get her for free because she synergized with the list, that would be good. The other thing is Wolf Riders don't use corpses, so most of the things that actually that have Heart Eater are the Death Wolves and the Tharn Ravager models. I've actually been bringing a White Mane and a Shaman to put those corpses on. You could try to find room for the Death Wolves depending on your list. You can do Lord of the Feast as well. Sorry, he's not technically a Tharn. Those are your options. If you played them with Chromac 2, you could put them on Chromac 2. However, for me, I haven't. So there's a little bit of list building stuff there that I'm not in love with, but they do go in this well. You also, you could, if you don't want to bring Ravagers, bringing them and Blood Trackers and Blood Weavers to give your Death Wolves corpses is totally valid. But I just want to make sure I highlighted that the Wolf Rider champion I think would be a great piece to help bring them along. She can get real far across the table. She can score flags that normally you'd have trouble with, but right now I've eschewed that just because the number of points and or not being able to get them for free has meant that it didn't really work well with my list. So you may find something similar. Anyways, Wolf Riders, just to sort of cap this, they have many attacks, which is why buffs on them are fantastic. They're very fast. I didn't really go into reposition 5 so much, but it lets them really flank around harder, and you can continue to get into your opponent's side of the table, or you can stay back and stay safe, depending on which positionally is important in the game. And they're a really flexible unit. They both have the ability. They have the ability to do melee and ranged. They are going to suffer against boosted shots. They potentially can suffer against unboosted shots, but play them in ways you can protect them, or play them knowing like what you're going to be giving up and so forth. So anyways, that's why I've been playing Wolf Riders. That's why I like them. Feel free to give me some comments, or if you've played them or you have, or we can certainly have more discussion on it. And as always, I thank you for watching.